In this presentation, we will be overviewing the candidacy of Joe Biden in the 2020 presidential election, looking into his political platform and policies, his presence in media, how other students may compare with his own policies and issues that are important to his candidacy, and his campaign finances.
In this section, we are going to cover the evolution of the current two-party system here in the United States and 6 of the major policy goals Joe Biden and the Democratic Party have chosen to guide Americans towards a better future.
Section 11.1 goes over the roots of the two-party system. At the start, there were the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. The Federalists were organized around mercantile groups in New England who supported protective tariffs, the assumption of states' Revolutionary War debts, the creation of a national bank, and the resumption of commercial ties to England. The Democratic Republicans supported free trade, the promotion of agrarian interests, and stronger ties to France. Jefferson, a Democratic Republican, became the first U.S. president elected as the nominee of an official political party. However, he considered his party as a temporary measure to defeat Adams in the election, not as a long-term tool. By 1820, the Federalist Party dissolved and eventually disappeared, leaving the nation with only the Democratic-Republican Party until the 1830s. The Democratic Party, which came after the Democratic-Republican Party, expanded during Andrew Jackson's presidency. Vice President Martin Van Buren organized the movement towards creating a central party committee, state party organizations, and newspapers. Jacksonians also established state and national conventions as the basis for nominating presidential candidates. Opposition to President Jackson led to the creation of the Whig Party. The 1832 election between Jackson and Clay was the first time the party's nominee was chosen at a large party convention instead of a small caucus. So, Jackson was the first chief executive to win the White House as a nominee of a national popular political party. The Whigs and the Democrats made the U.S. into the first broadly supported two-party system in the Western world. The issue of slavery dissolved the Whig Party and led to the creation of the Republican Party. In 1860, the Republicans were able to win the vote for Abraham Lincoln, and in the modern era, post-World War II, social changes led to the move away from strong political parties. A weakening of this party system led to the rise of candidate-centered politics, which focused on each candidate individually and not their party affiliation. Party realignment refers to drastic changes a political party and its voters take that require a critical election. 3 major critical elections over the course of U.S. history have taken place. First, Thomas Jefferson formed the Democratic-Republican Party, which won the presidency and Congress in 1800. He formed this party due to the opposition of the Federalists' desire for a strong, centralized federal government. Second, in reaction to the growing crisis over slavery, the Whig Party dissolved and the Republican Party grew and won the presidency in 1860. Third, the Great Depression caused many voters to shift to the Democratic Party in 1932.
The roles of political parties are to organize conflict and represent citizens' interests in Washington, D.C., state capitals, and local governments, engage in fundraising activities necessary to run candidates for political office, and provide manpower and electoral expertise in order to deliver voters on Election Day. Political parties are organized on the national, state, and local level. The primary function of the National Party is to establish a cohesive vision for partisan identifiers nationwide and to disseminate that vision to party members and voters. The leader of the National Party is called the chairperson. They're the primary spokesperson for the party during the 4 years between elections. The current chairperson for the DNC is Jamie Harrison. The Democratic National Committee was formed in 1848. It makes arrangements for the National Convention and coordinates the subsequent presidential campaign. It raises campaign funds primarily for the presidential race. It mitigates factional disputes within the party, and it works with the media in order to enhance the party's image. The National Convention is held every 4 years by each party to nominate its presidential and vice presidential candidates. Delegates are representatives to the party conventions. The Democratic committees in Congress are the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. They raise and distribute campaign funds for House and Senate seats, develop campaign strategies, recruit candidates, and conduct on-the-ground campaigns. Political party organization at the state and local level is where the roots of each party lie. Most government regulation of political parties falls to the states. Most party leadership positions are filled at subnational levels. The precinct is the smallest voting unit. There are 100,000 plus precincts in the United States. The role of state and local parties is to recruit candidates, conduct voter registration drives, and provide funds to candidates. Some informal groups associated with the Democratic Party are the National Federation of Democratic Women, the College Democrats of America, the Young Democrats of America, the Democratic Governors Association, labor unions, progressive groups, teachers, African American and women's groups, and Americans for Democratic Action, and the Center for American Progress, Center for National Policy, and Open Society Foundations.
Minor parties in the U.S. electoral system typically were formed because of issues that were neglected to be faced by major parties. They've had an important impact on the American political system, and most of these parties were often formed because of things like sectionalism, economic protest, and as well as the personalities of said candidates who endorse these groups. Despite minor parties taking on issues that major parties often don't, they aren't usually successful because typically major parties will see the examples of problems that minor parties are, attempting to tackle and just add them on to their campaign list of issues that they, plan to take care of during their presidency. And since majority of the population is looking at them anyway, these people are then more likely to vote for them. And also, the people that then supported their party before, their minor party, will change their vote to the major party because they feel like there's more support already, and the minor party was already more likely to lose in the first place. This happens because of the winner-takes-all system as well as the electoral college system. On this timeline, I've listed 5 different minor parties that were formed between 1840 and 1971. Typically, these parties were formed because of certain issues such as abolishing slavery or prohibition of alcohol sale and consumption. Other parties were formed because of a certain candidate, such as Theodore Roosevelt with the Progressive Bull Party. And other parties were formed because of economic and social policy that they had, certain drives to change or to prevent certain things from happening with. Along with the 5 minor party examples on the timeline already, I've provided 2 pictures of the party logos of 2 other minor parties that are prominent in the U.S. electoral system.
What is polarization? Polarization is the increasing partisan divide between people. People are becoming more polarized to their affiliated parties' beliefs with less and less overlap. Possible causes of polarization. a rise in negative partisanship, where voters have formed strong loyalties based on their hatred for the opposing parties, American loyalty to a certain party, an increase of tribalism, where Americans live near people with similar views, a surge for antipathy for opposing parties since 1994, from about 23% for Democrats and 28% for Republicans in 1994 to 71% for the Republicans and 62% in Democrats in 2018. And changing patterns in the news and information production and consumption have also contributed to this partisan polarization. The consequences of polarization are that Congress is less productive, fewer bills are passed, there's an increased political apathy amongst the public, along with partisan antagonism, and less participation and trust in politics. So what is Joe Biden doing to combat this polarization? One of Biden's biggest campaign messages is unity. He believes the U.S. is severely divided and work needs to be done to mend the wounds of America. He wants us to be whole again.
Creating a 21st century immigration system. The United States is often described as a melting pot, and that's due to the diverse range of people that reside within the states. Trump's immigration policies dehumanize immigrants, and they force families apart and away from each other. COVID-19 testing and treatment is most often refused to people without a valid U.S. citizenship. Democrats seek to rework everything that Trump has made in regards to immigration. By reversing Trump's administration policies, it will help create a safer place for victims of domestic violence, victims of gang violence, and LGBTQ+ immigrants. The current policies deny asylum to these people, and the Democratic Party would seek to change this fact. One of the main fixes for people would be to return children's parents that were taken away from them. Restoring their families would help to end the immigration year barriers and to remove the 10-year waiting period for waivers that lift the permanent ban on immigrants. By instituting the Protect Our Workers Exploitation and Retaliation Act, we will protect our schools, places of worship, offices, hospitals, and healthcare facilities. This will also prevent raids that separate children from their family members. Detention of individuals should be utilized as a last resort rather than a first thought. Detaining children should have the shortest time, and people should not be detained purely based on disabilities, mental illness, sex, gender, race, or religion, and should have fair reason and humane, lawful treatment. Providing a world-class education in every zip code. The next generation is built upon many things, with education being the most prominent and most important. Every child deserves access to the proper education, regardless of their sex, gender, race, religion, or sexual orientation. Public schools have suffered from low grants and having little wiggle room with funding. With the rise of COVID-19, parents were shown how invaluable in-class learning is, as online learning can lead to a much lower retention rate. Democrats want to promise universal early childhood education, ensuring that all students, including those with disabilities, receive the accommodation that they need, regardless of their zip code. Democrats would also seek to provide family-supporting wages for teachers and educators. Prioritizing STEM teachers and programs will encourage students to pursue the best educations and achieve the best careers. Democrats want to end the need for privately funded charter schools and allow for schools to be eligible for federal funding. Along with funding schools, Democrats would make higher education and universities more affordable and accessible. Doubling Pell Grant funding and making community college and trade school tuition-free would encourage more students to seek a higher education. Student debt is a crushing issue for the majority of students that attend colleges and university, and forgiving $10,000 in student debt per year for 5 years will help eliminate the need for student debt.
Since the COVID-19 pandemic took the world by storm, it is important to Biden to protect Americans and recover from the coronavirus. He aims to enforce protections for emergency management systems by imposing the Americans with Disabilities Act to ensure that hospitals have proper equipment to accommodate Americans that have disabilities. Democrats also want to increase the funding for the CDC, state health departments, and local health departments in order to both cut down on the spread of the virus and work towards a possible way to end the virus altogether. Containing and eliminating the virus would put American people back on track to fixing the economy. In order to further rebuild the economy post-COVID-19, Biden is looking to reform the unemployment insurance system and make payroll support more appealing. Paid leave will encourage people to take the time to recover when sick and lower the risk of spreading illness in the workplace. By raising wage replacement rates and expanding the range of the unemployment insurance, it will help to push the employment market back into a healthy state. Creating more jobs will help to prevent another depression from coming about. Small businesses have taken the pandemic particularly hard, and giving them access to grants and loans instead of only larger corporations will rejuvenate them and help the people who need it to stay afloat. Since Trump failed to communicate the severity of COVID-19, it directly led to a widespread outbreak throughout the United States, affecting the health and employment of many. Biden's intentions is to help people recover financially while keeping people safe and preventing further spread of the virus. Biden strives to encourage schools to utilize extra funding for guidance counselors, social workers, nurses, and school psychologists to distinguish appropriate disciplinary actions rather than seeking help from the police. He's also pushing to incentivize states to stop incarcerating adolescents by providing opportunities for positive growth, as well as giving children a second chance coming out of the juvenile justice system. In addition, Democrats want real accountability for individual and systemic misconduct in law enforcement and require training using effective nonviolent tactics, implicit bias, and peer intervention. Having strict national standards for the use of force and no-knock warrants are important, and allowing the ban of religious and racial profiling is dire in this country. Biden seeks to eliminate the need for law enforcement in the everyday lives of Americans and refocus policing to be for the benefit and safety of all citizens. He looks to decriminalize marijuana use and legalize medical marijuana use while automatically expunging all past criminal convictions for cannabis use. Increasing use of drug courts, harm reduction interventions, and treatment diversion programs will help guide people towards the right path instead of giving them an unreasonable punishment. Giving a higher level of training and an education for all levels of the justice system to provide just and equal treatment to those who are tried. On top of that, it's important to diversify the court system and repeal federal mandatory sentence minimums. He also seeks to eliminate cash bail and imprisonment for failing to pay fines or fees. Biden aspires to build trust by reforming the United States criminal justice system and strives to protect communities across the country.
Joe Biden is a man of the people, and that's why he has prioritized building a stronger, fairer economy. He knows that protecting workers and families is the backbone of a healthy economy. That's why he wants to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026, prioritize passing the PRO Act, and restore workers' rights to unionize and launch secondary boycotts. He wants to repeal the right-to-work laws and support legislations to protect whistleblowers and anti-retaliation protections. He also wants to increase the funding to the Department of Labor to allow them to aggressively enforce wage, hour, health, and safety regulations, as well as investing in job creation. Biden also understands the importance of home ownership and safe housing, which is why he will increase the supply of housing, affordable housing, and address economic and racial inequalities in the housing market. He also wants to expand the low-income housing tax credit and commit to supporting Section 8 housing, as well as enacting new homeowner and renter Bill of Rights to protect homeowners and renters. He also wants corporations to pull their weight and to remove the tax burdens that fall on the middle class. That's why he wants to level the economic playing field by reforming the tax code to benefit working families and crack down on the overseas tax havens and close the loopholes for wealthy people and corporations. He also wants to require both of those to pay their fair tax rate, as well as addressing the over-financialization of Wall Street and requiring investors to pay their share in taxes. Biden also wants to keep the elderly from having to work beyond their retirement, which is why he wants to guarantee retirement by protecting Social Security and ensuring it remains for generations to come. He also wants to protect public and private pensions. Joe Biden recognizes the importance of the climate crisis and knows that we must act now to safeguard our planet for future generations. That is why he wishes to pursue environmental justice and combat the climate crisis, starting with the reversal of the Trump administration's rollbacks of climate and environmental protections. And as soon as he takes office, he wishes to rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement and restore protections for public lands and water. He also wants to invest in clean energy, which would create new jobs, energy efficiency, clean transportation, advanced manufacturing, and sustainable agriculture, while expanding solar energy, wind energy, and renewable energy. The Biden administration also has a net zero greenhouse gas emissions goal as soon as possible, or by 2050, which would eliminate carbon pollution from power plants by 2035 and reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions for all new buildings by 2030. Biden also wishes to expand federal programs for farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners, encouraging the pursuit of high productivity, lower emission, and regenerative agriculture, as well as investing in conservation programs and healthy coastal marine ecosystems. Lastly, Biden wants to invest in the maintenance of water systems for home, industrial, commercial, and agricultural use.
In this section, we are going to cover and speak on Joe Biden's presence in the media alongside the many aspects and biases associated with it. In addition, we will go into detail on how media truly influences society and politics. Joe Biden is the 46th President of the United States. He served as a senator in the state of Delaware from 1973 to 2009. He is also considered the 47th Vice President under President Barack Obama when he was in office, which was under the Democratic Party. He is from a town called San Cranton City in Pennsylvania. Biden also supports the passing of the Equality Act, which is going to be able to amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to prohibit discrimination among sex, gender equalities, gender differences, as well as different cultures. He also supports the Free Community College, as well as the $1.7 trillion climate change plan, which is going to be called the Green New Deal, which is going to tackle climate change altogether.
Climate change is listed as one of the highest concerns amongst voters, mainly due to data provided by scientists, the increased wildfires, hurricanes, etc. CNN attributes these increase in natural disasters to climate change, while Fox News does not. Fox News personality Tucker Carlson talks about the recent climate change effects in Democrats' fires and the climate and misinformation campaign. This headline's video shows a clear bias against the Democratic Party by painting them as only trying to gain political power through their, quote, misinformation campaign. However, CNN shows a bias in the future of climate change is here, scientists warns, as they present the best course of action against climate change is Joe Biden's Green New Deal, which strongly favors the candidate. Economy or economic policies is also listed as one of the highest concerns by the people, mainly due to the way the COVID pandemic affected businesses and employment. Wages and taxations are being heavily debated by both sides of the bipartisan. When covering this issue, the two main news stations had a different approach when covering this issue. Fox News shares the views of the Republican approach to taxation and wages, believing that taxation shouldn't be increased for anyone, including the wealthy, and wages should be set by the free market, while Democrats believe that taxation should be increased by the wealthy and the wages should be set by the ever-changing economy. The Fox News expressed their disdain for increased taxation. Further in their coverage, Carl Crow, Biden's proposed tax increase would kill more than 500,000 U.S. jobs. This article shows a clear bias against Joe Biden and this policy as it headlines that it will make many Americans lose their jobs. While CNN's coverage and Democrats want to tax the very rich, here's who they are, shows that Joe Biden's plan of increased taxation on the wealthy as a positive thing for the economy, which shows a bias towards the candidate.
This is for the healthcare critique. The article we will be analyzing for the Fox stance is Azar blast Obamacare as not affordable healthcare as Supreme Court battle over 2010 law looms. This shows a bias against Biden because he is a Democrat, and article is basically slamming Democrats. This is also an important case because it shows how Fox finds a way to always discredit Democrats in a way. And also, the article we will be analyzing for the CNN stance is healthcare, how plans from Biden, Buttigieg, Sanders, and Warren stack up. This shows bias towards Biden because it gives us the vision for the Affordable Care Act and his other packages. This is important because it gives props to Biden and his plan for healthcare.
Chapter 13.1 Mass media in any form is the way the general public gets informed. There are many different forms of mass media, ranging from newspapers and radio shows to social media and news broadcasts. Print media, otherwise known as newspapers, was one of the first and biggest forms of mass media. Following the newspaper's popularity, radio shows became popular, especially after President Franklin D. Roosevelt held fireside chats. Talk shows such as Fireside Chats kept America engaged in current events and politics because it gave them the chance to hear directly from the president. Today, TV news such as Fox and CNN remains one of the most popular ways to get informed. Social media in the digital age will soon catch up to televised news broadcasts because social media makes getting caught up on the news more accessible and efficient.
Chapter 13.2 How do the news media cover politics? There are many different forms of communication between media and public figures or elected officials, including press releases, which are written documents that states an official comment or position covering an event, press briefs, which is a monitored and restricted engagement with the press, and press conferences, which are similar to briefings except much less strict. Another form of interaction are news leaks, which are intentional leaks or confidential information by anonymous sources to the public. The press often focuses its attention on the president, which enables the president to appear on live TV on short notice. Coverage on Congress is very difficult due to the amount of members in Congress, so the press splits their coverage on Congress into three groups: the leaders of both chambers and party, key committee chairs, and local senators and representatives. Also due to its sheer size, the coverage is often negative of Congress. Coverage on the Supreme Court also proves difficult as the court does not permit cameras in hearings. However, they do permit print and broadcast reports. This restriction is to ensure that the Supreme Court does not base its decision on majority. The downside is that the public does not often have the coverage necessary to form an opinion on the Supreme Court.
Chapter 13.1 How do media influence and news media bias affect public confidence? As we know, the news media has an important effect on public opinion. They have a major effect on public opinion because that's how people get their news. For example, people watch TV to get their news. Agenda setting is one way that the media affect public opinion. Agenda setting basically means forming a list of issues to be addressed by the government. Another way that government has effect on people's opinion is by framing. Framing also means the news organization define the public issues. There is media bias in the news. For example, journalists can be biased in the news by the language they use, their status, editorial endorsement, and public confidence in the press is measured by survey. Chapter 13.4, what rules govern the media? In this chapter, we talk about what rules govern the media, as it said. Code of Ethics published by the Society of Professional Journalism guides journalists with their ethical behavior. This Code of Ethics includes principles and standards in governing issues such as avoiding conflicts, verifying the information being reported, and dealing ethically with sources. The Telecommunication Act regulates the whole segment of electronic media.
Chapter 13.5. There are 5 main trends that affect the media in a major way. Corporate ownership, media consolidation, narrowcasting, infotainment, and experts and citizen journalists all fall under this category. Private ownership plays a big part in the media, and it serves media independence as well. Narrowcasting is based on media programming in specific populations. Therefore, it enables political leaders to exercise message control. It is a form of communication with digital screens that is characterized by a limited selected audience. An example of this is electronic mailing lists where messages are only sent to people who are subscribed to it. Infotainment is a mixture of entertainment, news, and politics.
Our group, Public Opinion and Demographic Polls, gives comparisons and contrasts of data from survey questions asked by our group to the students of this class. The polls taken provide information on our opponent which will lead us to vote against that candidate. The feedback we get is important because we analyze and evaluate the data our class gives us so we can see the opinions on standing candidates from either political party.
Since the 1930s, governmental decision makers have relied heavily on public opinion polls to gauge the feelings and beliefs of the American public. Polls have played a key role in defining issues of concern to the public, shaping administrative decisions, and helping speed up the process of democracy. The survey results indicate that the majority of students in the class are females. This is typical of the United States population. In addition to this, the class has a higher percentage of people of color compared to what is usually represented in the United States. As a result, the data may be biased towards people of color, women, and their opinions. The data from our survey may also be skewed by the option other in some of the questions, like the ones you see here. As you can see on the current slide, the majority of respondents who voted in the 2020 election are more likely to participate in the next election. Of that majority, 8 weren't able to vote during the 2020 election due to their age. In the coming elections, respondents who did not cast a ballot in last year's election will be more inclined to do so now. However, 3 respondents still do not intend to vote in the coming elections or are less likely to do so.
Which is more crucial, managing the coronavirus now, even if it harms the economy, or reconstructing the economy, even if it damages efforts to contain the coronavirus? So, the global economy and financial markets have been severely impacted by COVID-19. The disease mitigation measures that have been imposed in many nations have resulted in significant income reductions, increased unemployment, and disruptions in transportation, service, and industrial industries, to name a few. Such significant economic impact that has occurred across the globe is due to the reduced productivity, loss of life, business closures, trade disruption, and decimation of the tourism industry caused by COVID-19. Thankfully, the Biden administration is going to help Americans by giving them stimulus checks throughout the pandemic. Biden believes that we need to continue these so that we can make sure Americans can function through these trying times. He plans on giving out $1.9 trillion in stimulus checks to people. He also plans out signing a massive $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill that will give money to our essential workers, and not to mention how much he plans to help those in further need, with his many thoughts on healthcare, which to help people out even more than the stimulus.
Hello everyone, my name is Azari Rodriguez, and today I will be discussing the poll results of our students who participated and list the significance of racism to them and to what group they found important. In the PowerPoint, we have a pie chart titled, "Would you consider racism in the United States as a serious issue, a slight issue, and not an issue at all?" Results that came back were for 0% of students who believed that racism was not an issue. 75.7% feels that racism was a serious issue in blue, and 24.3% of students who sided with racism being a slight issue in the United States. Results that came back stating that 11 students believe that this is an issue that's serious among white/Caucasians, 12 who feels that the issue is serious among African American and or blacks, 4 among Hispanic or Latinos, and 1 among Asians. As for slight issues, 8 among white/Caucasians, 1 among African American and or black, 0 for both Hispanic and Latino communities among Asians. With racism affecting minority groups, Joe Biden has created an agenda to ensure fair returns for the minority to receive equal opportunities and fairness in their work habits. 2 includes reforming opportunity zones to fulfill their promise and ensure workers of color are compensated fairly and treated with dignity. With this plan, he is confident that we can bring out minorities and to further their better living habits from COVID.
Public opinion. Public opinion results. The survey question was, do you believe in legalization of same-sex marriage? 80% of voters said yes, 13.3% of voters said no, and 6.7% had no opinion. Our current president of the United States advocates for LGBT marriage rights. His advocation is to ensure equality for the entire LGBT plus community. He advocates for same-sex couples' rights and the rights of the LGBT community in the workforce, military, and even the homeless. He plans to accomplish this by expanding access to high-quality health care for LGBTQ plus individuals, restoring full implementation of President Obama's executive order prohibiting discrimination by federal contractors, which was overturned by the Trump administration in 2019. Reverse the transgender military ban, which will allow transgender members of the military to serve openly, receive medical treatment when needed, and be free from discrimination. And also by ensuring a portion of the grant for the Ending Homeless Act is specifically designated for the LGBT youth, who are more likely to be affected by homelessness.
Biden's agenda for climate change is something he considers urgent. He advocates for clean energy use and is investigating alternative options to completely alter the path we're on now. Biden has the most expensive investment plan in history for environmental remediation. He plans on creating 1 million new jobs in the auto industry to produce electric cars. He plans to create 1.5 million sustainable homes. He plans on investing $2 trillion over the course of 4 years in green areas. That includes infrastructure, transportation and auto industries, housing and construction practices, nature conservation efforts, and work with the environmental justice system. By doing this, he plans to combat climate change by pushing the United States on the path towards net zero carbon emissions by the year 2050, with an intermediate goal of ridding the power sector of carbon pollution by 2035. 82.4% of all voters believe that climate change is a major issue, and 100% of the Democrat voters voted that climate change was an important issue to them as well.
Social media no doubt influences the way we think and shape public opinion.
Biden's campaign has been working to reach young voters through social media and took to influencers to help get Gen Z voter turnout. Chapter 10, Section 5 talks about how anything can be proven or disproven with public opinion polls. Public opinion inevitably influences the actions of politicians and public officials. The tools available to pollsters make data collection, analysis, and dissemination easier than ever, but there can be dangerous consequences into having so much data on aggregate public opinion, such as the horse races atmosphere of election reporting. Polls may also distract from the true issues of the election and obscure citizens' understanding of the political process. Social media is one of the many news outlets that dispenses information on politics, and a lot can be discredited and unproven. While younger generations take to Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, a lot of information isn't fact-checked. Those who spend countless hours researching their own opinion can forget about the actual facts. A wide percentage of class believes that social media is big on shaping the public's opinion, which does affect voter turnout. Around 4 in 10 Americans trust Fox News, and nearly the same amount of people distrust it. Our class, which is mostly Democratic, believe that Fox is too biased. Since Fox is a conservative news source, and no doubt most Republicans in this class don't think it's biased, but rather CNN is, the Biden administration has been, no doubt, harshly criticized on Fox News. The main reason Fox is the most distrusted news source is because of its discredited information and false claims that have no evidence to back it up. Biased news does have influence over the views of presidential candidates, and those who continue believing false information will spread it to others. That's why news on all platforms should look at all the facts for presidential candidates, whether it's Fox or CNN.
Joe Biden has outlined ideas to combat gun violence during his 2020 campaign, including a proposal to ban assault weapons, impose stronger background checks, and prohibit the sale of firearms and ammunition over the internet. Joe Biden believes that the increase in gun violence that has impacted communities around the country in the last year and a half is unacceptably high. The Biden-Harris administration has announced a comprehensive plan to address gun violence and other forms of violent crime. This technique employs proven preventative strategies to minimize violent crime while also addressing the core causes, such as the flow of firearms used in criminal activity. When combined, the administration's overall approach will stop the flow of guns used to commit violence, including holding rogue gun dealers accountable for breaking federal laws, providing local law enforcement with federal tools and resources to combat summer violent crime, invest in community violence initiatives that are based on scientific research, expanding career possibilities, summer programming, and other supports and services for young adults, and lastly, assisting formerly incarcerated people in effectively re-entering society.
In this section, we will highlight the donations received by Joe Biden during the 2020 presidential election campaign, as well as focus on the roots of American elections and provide an analysis of the demographics related to the type of people who participated in the 2020 presidential election. President-elect Joe Biden announced he was running for president in April 2019 and has raised a total of $1.3 billion as of January 2021, according to OpenSecrets.org. Overall, the 2020 cycle saw over $625 million from people working in the securities and investment industries and between congressional and presidential contests. As we can see here, as we take a summary of Biden's financial history, we see that between 1989 and present day, Democratic and liberal parties have donated over $171 million. Educational entities have donated over $65 million. The top contributors from 1989 to current day began with Alphabet Inc., over $4 million, and through the University of California, just over $4 million as well. And as you can note here, as reported as of December 31st, 2020, Biden has raised over $1 billion, but he's also spent just as much. Cash on hand, close to $4 million, or $3.5 million, and as reported, $0 in debt. Very large donations in U.S. presidential elections are directed towards super PACs, or also known as political action committees. A political action committee is a political committee that campaign contributions from members and donates those funds to campaigns for or against candidates, ballot initiatives, or even legislation. PACs are typically formed to represent businesses, laborers, and personal interests by individuals who wish to privately raise money to donate to a political campaign. Now you have carry committees, and this is a hybrid political action committee. So this is a hybrid PAC. And these PACs are typically not affiliated with the candidate and has the ability to operate both as a traditional PAC, also while contributing funds to a candidate's committee, and also as a super PAC, which makes independent donations. To do so, carry committees must have a separate bank account for each purpose. The committee can collect unlimited contributions from almost any source of its independent account, but may not use those funds for its traditional PAC contributions. During the final debate, Trump actually took aim at Biden for those on Wall Street backing him in campaign contributions. Now, these donations are seen from those in the securities and investment industries who gave over $50 million towards backing Biden's candidacy, which is the most ever spent on an election by those who work in the finance and investment sectors. Now, the Trump campaign went into October of 2020 with just over $60 million in cash on hand, compared with Biden's nearly $180 million, which is 3 times the amount. But as illustrated here, by mid-October and towards the end of November, which is after Biden won the election, we see that both Biden and Trump raised and spent approximately $1.7 to $2 billion respectively, with Biden with $25 million in cash on hand and Trump $77 million in cash on hand. And if you look at the lighter blue section of the bar graph on Biden's side, you see that $173 million specifically was raised between October 15th and November 23rd. Just as with the lighter red section with Trump, you see that $386 million was raised between that same time period.
What are the roots of American elections? The original and present purpose for an election is to create political change. The candidates are voted by eligible voters in the fashion of elections. These elections give a layout view of which candidates are desired more within the countries hosting the election. Elections can be categorized into 2 electoral stages: primary elections and general elections. Primary elections are where the voters vote for who they primarily want to represent their parties. As the general elections, the voters will vote for one of the 2 opposing parties' candidates. The winning candidate will not only represent the party, but also fill public offices. Elections are mainly targeting the general public and their wants and needs. The public votes not only for what candidate they like, but also for what they don't like. These are called initiatives. The public proposes amendments while trying to gather the correct numbers of signatures of support. Referendum is similar. Instead of public proposing, the state legislation handles it. Winning most of the electoral college is the focus in presidency. The result of an election can result in recalls or winner-take-all primary.
On Section 4 from Chapter 12, they explain the patterns in voters' turnouts and choices and how they may vary in many different ways, such as race, age, gender, and people's incomes. Turnouts refer to the proportion of people's voting age public that cast ballots. They also explain how people of color are mainly on the Democratic side. In 2020, Joe Biden had earned 87% of the black voters. Meanwhile, Trump only gained 12%. And people who make less than $50,000 a year mainly voted for Joe Biden. And how many of the younger voters were also Democrats. Meanwhile, a lot of the older voters were Republican. On my slide, I explained a few patterns that have happened in the past few years. And I also put in a few graphs so you guys could see a visual representation of how there is a pattern, or just to support the patterns that I had put in.
In Section 5 of Chapter 12, we learn about political reform and realities, mending the electoral process. An issue is front-loading. Front-loading is the tendency of states to choose an early date on the nomination calendar. On this slide, I've posted a small video that explains what front-loading is in more detail. Front-loading contributes to the elongation of the presidential campaign, and it usually benefits the front-runner. Another suggestion is the reform of the Electoral College. One would be to use the national popular vote to choose the president. And while this is the most democratic reform, it is least likely to be enacted since it would require that the Electoral College be abolished, and it is very unlikely. Another is the congressional district vote. With this plan, it would retain the Electoral College, but give each candidate one electoral vote each. Congressional district that he or she wins in a state, and the winner of the overall popular vote in each state would receive 2 bonus votes for that state. With this plan, the winner of the popular vote could still lose the election. There are other ideas to how to increase voter turnaround in the United States. Voter registration would include online registration, same-day registration, and a higher government responsibility. Voter ID requirements. Some believe that identification laws disproportionately limit women, race, and ethnic minorities. Absentee ballots. The fact that many states require an in-person request for an absentee ballot is burdensome, given the need for the absentee ballot in the first place. National holiday. Reformers believe that Election Day should be a national holiday to eliminate the busy workday as an obstacle. Strengthening political parties. Reformers argue that strengthening political parties would increase voter turnout. Other suggestions include online voting and voting by mail.